Well, hello everyone. You talk about right here. I talk about telephone lines. It could be a telephone line that is maybe related to like maybe a cell phone, or if it's like what you call that the type of a adapter type phone. Such as maybe like if it's Skype or Magic Jack or some line like that. But talk about right here is like you have right here is the world right here, and you're likely wearing too that a lot of times that if you got any family or friend relatives that you would like to call maybe during a weekly basis, and you're likely wondering too about is that a lot of times though when it comes to phone calls though is that you whenever you do find something that maybe in the stores or somewhere like that, and 102 is that not only that if you buy a device to where you can go ahead and make phone calls, but then also ask as to where if it's long distance and like the type of long distance availability it has. And so it sure seems that way to where if you're going to be getting a cell phone or some kind, and a lot of times, though, that how many of us are really going to be paying attention to where how big the flash drive memory card is, about how big the memory card is, and or maybe if it has a built-in camera and all. But most of the phones do. But you have right here, I'm like, how many of those phones are going to maybe have this built-in headset where you can go ahead and put a headset on, and even if you're going to be on the video game and want to know just a little bit too to where yeah wireless headset to where you can have maybe clear sound coming on the phone or something like that, clear sound. And so it sure seems that way to where that if you're going to be making a phone call though, like you want to know too, is that yeah, with clear sound, that there's like those type of speakers to where you'll be able to hear the person very clearly, and other source of a source of plug accessories to where that if you're relying on the speakers like on a T, like a yeah on the phone or some device like that. And like I say is that yeah that yeah, you can just barely hear the person, but still that it's all about the fact about that whenever it comes to electronics though. But you talk about right here is likely one and two is that whenever it comes to learning the basics about telephones and basically about long distance, and you're likely one too is that whenever you pick up, like say like a landline phone right here, and let's just say that yeah, number one, that compared to using a mobile app, that you always have to remember to maybe to dial the one or the zero first, and then the area code, and then the telephone number, right? And most of the time that's usually how most telephones would work, is to where if you're going to be dialing long distance, that a lot of times that you had to dial a one or a zero first, before you enter the area code. And I know a lot of people back in the old days would say too that a lot of times if you're going to be ordering something from over the phone or somewhere like that, it's like 1-800 number even to call the doctor. And 102 is that the local operator would come up and be like, yeah, that please dial one and then the area code first. And so your numbers like that. But a lot of times though, it sure seems that way to where if you're trying to plug if you're trying to get some basic training on how to use a telephone though, and you have like a device like Magic Jack right here, and let's just say that with this Magic Jack device right here that you plug it in, and just like any kind of air freshener, that you're going to be using, and at 102 is that you plug this device in, and then then it comes up with the screen to install that the latest software miller, and then you'll be able to make your phone calls. And but the way I think about too, though, with this Magic Jack right here, that a lot of times it gets kind of aggravating whenever you don't really have access to like a phone directory. And want to know too that most telephones you weren't to where that yeah that number one, that how come you can't you don't really have access to any source of phone directory, and let's just say if you can maybe call other numbers maybe around the globe, and you weren't too, is that how come you don't have access to any source of phone directory. And it may be that if anything that all you if you're going to be maybe making a Skype call, or maybe call maybe on Messenger chat or something like that, or Snapchat, and want to know is that yeah, that really all you really need to do is send like a by email and all that, but still that send a request, contact requests and all that. But still, though, looking back besides the analog right here, that when we want to make a phone call, though, are we really looking at the globe necessarily? Are we really looking at the globe, or are we necessarily just looking at the phone right here? To where that back before we even knew what caller ID was, is this exactly what the phone was right here? This, the phone was more like a microphone. Yeah, it was more like a microphone that you just yeah, in case of anybody that may ask me though, that besides if it's the language though, it could maybe also be the multiplication tables too, that you're trying to remember what the number is. And so a lot of times, have we all been in that situation to where if we're trying to make a phone call and we're trying to remember what the telephone number is just to be able to call somebody, and it's like, number one, know that if you got a lot going on and you pick up that telephone and you can't remember what the number is, and if anything, you're just going to go ahead and just get on that smartphone and just yeah, that there's a way of how to be able to make a phone call and a lot of times. So it shows up in recent call history and all that. But really though, that with a lot of these smartphones and smartwatches, though, it sure seems that way to where that maybe if you would go back to the old landline phone and be able to say, yeah, well, if anything, maybe just to check it out, but still that number one, that long distance, like say that you used to maybe had to pay a little extra just to have long distance on the telephone here. And anybody say that, yeah, whenever you talk on a telephone, that even those analog phones, that, you'll be kind of amazing knowing about that, that you can actually call, all around the country all around the globe, but just by with this phone right here. And so you're likely thinking too, is that yeah, that no really no hard drilling and no hard wiring or anything like that. Just to be able to install a separate phone line or something like that. But I tell you one thing, everybody, that whenever it comes to making a phone call, though, and then the plus, phone numbers, and I'm sure we've all been there to where if you're trying to make a phone call, and then maybe you don't always have the number handy, and you wonder that too, is that how come that maybe some of these website, like some of these phone sites, like software like Magic Jack, how come that there's like no phone directory? And I guess if for any reason at all that yeah, you can look that up, but still that I know with me though that in case if somebody were say is that yeah, that whenever it comes to using a telephone, though, that you likely learned to where the first thing was, is that you may not have long distance on the telephone line, but then second of all, it's like even if you did have the number, and like I said, but still, so it sure seems that way to where you look at the old way, like, yeah, caller ID is built in right here, everybody. I like it. I think from back in 1997 or so, that caller ID was first announced, and not everybody had them on their phones, and so that's why it's like by every time the phone rang, and then the numbers, of course, would show up. Yeah, phone directory, the dial and menu right here. So yeah, that so with this phone right here, that I guess this would be like a separate device right here. So by every time the phone would ring, then maybe that you would have to sit down in front of that computer or in front of that operating system and just try to program those numbers into the phone. So that way you'll be able to have them program on the phone to be able to make a phone call. So a lot of times it's like, yeah, if you really need to make a phone call maybe to the doctor or somebody like that, or yeah, that maybe if you're having a maybe to the maybe if it's insurance or something like that, if you're having to make an important phone call and you're trying to remember what the number is, and you always have to remember to keep it handy and all that. But the way I think about too, though, that whenever we're thinking about the globe right here, though, that whenever we think about the globe, that really though, that I think about more like an airplane, maybe a satellite or an airplane, everybody, like a satellite or an airplane that, whenever you're thinking about a globe, though, that, are we really necessarily thinking about a telephone whenever we look at the globe like that? And like you're thinking too, is that, yeah, that whenever it comes to long distance, and so it sure seems that way that whenever talking about if it's free long distance and then free caller ID and free call waiting, no, that a lot of times that it sure seems that way to where the chances are that a lot of people are going to probably want to stock up on a lot of these things just because free long distance and free call waiting. But let's just say that free party makers or something like that. But still, I know that other than what you call this advanced smartphone, no, that you one or two is to where that maybe possibility that there are going to be some companies that are going to maybe say is to where number one if it's built in. So if you're going to have a device like this, that's maybe cordless too, that they're going to say is the chances are that that's going to be what's called a top name product on the market as of today. Maybe if they announce as to where built in, or that this is included in the package or something like that. So I know that with me though, in case of somebody may want to, where it's like that if you buy yeah, and a lot of the phones that you can get nowadays that would have maybe a lot of more advanced features. But one thing that I did notice a lot of times, though, is that the devices that already have the stuff built in, especially. So let's just say though that if you're going to be on, it's like say it's your telephone. One like I say is that knowing about whenever it comes to making a telephone call, and you likely one too is like I say, if they say the local operator or something like that. But the way I think about it, though is that looking at a lot of these phones, and you likely one too is that you're not getting a ringtone, but still if the device is plugged in, and then you see right here, everybody, you got two different jacks right here, and this has happened to me. That I had the phone line connected to the Ethernet line, and people may say that as long as it fits, it works. Well, it don't always work all the time because we need to make sure that the connector jacks, of course, are connected properly. But it sure seems that way to where that you try almost everything else, making sure the device is getting internet connection and all that. But then you look at the device right here, and you're likely weren't. Well, it looks like it's connected correctly. I don't understand what's going on, what the problem is. Like, and we'll look closely because this jack right here, that right there is is to be able to connect the device. It's supposed to connect the device to the internet. It's supposed to connect the device to the internet. It's not supposed to connect. Like I say, there is a separate jack for that compared to connecting it to the telephone line right there. So you have right here with this jack right here that you got two different jacks right here. So anybody who may not have very much experience with using stuff like this right here. You just to be able to use an actual landline telephone and at 102 is that that a lot of stuff nowadays, but still though, if it's not going to be this, it's maybe going to be installing the mobile app to where you can be able to make certain phone calls, but still that you want that too is that whenever it comes to using a Magic Jack device, or if it's like just a typical wall jack, and you're one or two, is that making sure you check the connections. But still, though, somebody's maybe going to maybe ask is that how come that there's two jacks? But according to what the instructions say, of course, is mainly about the fact about one is for the internet to where you can actually connect this without requiring any PC you required connection, so you can connect this directly to the internet line, and then or you have it to where you can connect it to a USB accessibility device, and but still, whenever it comes to be able to make phone calls though, and you're likely one too, is that that whenever it comes to phone calls though, well, whenever it comes to phone calls, whenever you answer the phone a lot of times, it just sure seems that way to where one thing that I was thinking about the other day was the fact about is to where that you only have maybe one hand. And sometimes if you got a lot going on, that you only have one hand just to use, and you're likely one or two. Maybe one quarter deal, especially if you're dealing with working with a digital pen, and you say you answer the phone call, and then you're like Like it's really hard to do this with only one hand because I got the pin right here and the pin is going up. It's not supposed to do that. But still that well, whenever you're on the phone with somebody and let's just say that, like, will you show me what exactly what you're doing? Okay, well, I'm trying to write something down. Okay, trying to put a T and an R right here. And I'm having problems doing that just because it's like, I can only hold two things at the same time. Like I say, yeah, well, why don't you just put that pin right there on your ear, okay, and listen up, okay? You know, you can just keep it memorized, can't you? But I'm like, well, really though, if we can keep things memorized, then they could be due to change later on, and especially if it's login information, especially a password. And we all wonder too is that how come that's not on the instruction manual? But the way I think about it too is that whenever it comes to learning the basics about login information, though, it sure seems that way to where that yeah, that whenever it comes to a digital pin right here, and you wonder too is that really, are you supposed to be writing this down? While am I? But still, though, the way I think about it, though, with digital technology, though, that it sure seems that way to where that long distance doesn't seem to be too much of a problem now than compared to this to where if wireless networking is available or not. So it sure seems that way to where yeah, well, long distance ain't long distance ain't too much of a problem now as it was back then. So you're probably likely wondering too that even if you do have to dial or a one or a zero first, that does not mean, of course, is that that's a real big problem. But people say is to where if you're trying to make calls maybe nationwide or something like that, but you wonder too is that really, are you really looking at the globe whenever you pick up the telephone, huh? Are you really just kind of like, is your mind kind of just spinning like that? Okay, what's the number? But the way I think about it, though is that whenever you're looking at the globe right here, and you wonder too is that yeah that number one, that you're on different time zones, especially. And I was telling somebody that, whenever it's nice to be able to make these calls and that you say that, a lot of things that you can, use this technology for. But at the time, you wonder that too, is that, yeah, that, can you really keep track of, what time that, on the East Coast or on the, Eastern time or Western time or Pacific time is? And so you're likely wondering too is that, yeah, Pacific time is about down here, ain't it? But the way I think about it, though is that, whenever you pick up a telephone or whenever you make a phone call on a cell phone, though, it sure seems that way to what exactly are you thinking about whenever you actually pick up the telephone? And the way I used to think about a lot of times too, that when I pick up the telephone, yeah, to call a friend. I think I call a friend just right up the street. That's what it was. Maybe to call your neighbor and I don't know if most of us can remember back in those days is that if you were to make any phone call to anybody that you were trying to reach, maybe during the day or sometime like that, and that you're likely wondering too is that they were only about maybe 5 miles away, so they were local, and so it's like saying that about every time you would make a phone call, and it would be like the operator would come up and be like you may dial one or zero first, and then the area code. So it sure seems that way. That I have not really tried it, but how many of us have thought about that to where that how many times now do you have to dial one or zero first and then the area code just to be able to make the phone call? And a lot of times it's just the area code. A lot of times it's just the area code, but still, though, that you have a lot, few of these phones, and especially for what network that you're using. But a lot of times it sure seems that way. That long distance is not that too much of a big problem as it was before. And so you're probably thinking as to where that no kidding, of course, I'll say that with long distance that you don't have to worry about dialing a one or a zero. But the way I think about it, though, is that whenever you look at the telephone touch keypad right here, that zero, that whenever you dial zero right here, zero, or if it's star, star or pound right here, if we all think about that right there, you're well likely one or two, that star or zero though. That that can maybe mean a lot of things. Especially if you're making a phone call, maybe to take care of Bill or the doctor's office or anywhere like that, and that you're likely one or two, is that press pound to return, but yeah, press pound to return back to the main menu, or star to for more option, zero for more options and stuff like that. So yeah, that and even if you're just it might even if it is voting on election time, or if it's jury's doing jury duty or something like that, or maybe for any other source of call, that what you really see right here is really just the touchstone dial options right here whenever you make a phone call. So it sure seems that way, to where that if you're trying to solve maybe a math equation right here, and that you see quite a few buttons and want to know just a little bit too, to where exactly that if how simple is that, even though if it looks not so hard to figure it out, but still there's like a particular name for it, like other than this medical coding or something like that. There's like a particular name for what you call it, to where that one and one and five and nine or something like that, that would equal to like you know for minus, and then addition, and as well as maybe to the tile. If you're trying to call you know uh, call a company just for more information about, maybe if it's satellite TV or something like that. And so call to order pizza or something like that. But still, that back whenever I was young, that it was like long distance was not always free. So it's like about every time you turn around, that you would always have to remember. You would almost always have to remember to make sure that it was okay with the parents, or if anything, that just make sure you had an extra $1.75 ready. And like say, yeah, whenever you get the telephone bill. But still, though, it sure seems that way, that whenever it comes to telephone service, though, that you don't really see too much of. We may dial one or zero first, dial one or two first, and then the area code, just to be able to complete the call. And I don't really hear too much of that. And so that's why sometimes it sure seems that way, to where that whenever you're you making a phone call. But a lot of times it seems like to me, though, it's more of a problem to memorize the number than compared to always having to remember to dial a one or zero first. But still, though, it in case of a lot of people say, is to where, yeah, phone directories, so the phone caller IDs and all that. But with the phone directory, though, it's like, yeah, that it sure seems that way, to where you have a that yeah, and I really don't think that's, I might say that you would maybe call the number, maybe if you were having a direct line or something, like your direct phone number to the office. But I'm sure a lot of people probably say too that if you're familiar with like an account to like on Instagram, or maybe Facebook, that a lot of people use a lot of their source of communication. And they say that we don't even have to worry about no telephone numbers, just to be able to make a call. And so that's why maybe that's maybe the most common networking available as of today, just because that what you call is, to where if it's because maybe everybody, almost everybody's trained to how to use it, or just because is that yeah, that they are friend, if they're on there most of all the time, if they're on there most of all the time, then that they might, be introduced to it, just by somebody that referred to them to go ahead and try that. But I know with me, though, that whenever I first started learning how to use Facebook Messenger, though, that if I can remember right, that's whenever that I actually, yeah, I had to show somebody else how to install the app on their phone. So that's basically how it worked, is to where you had to have two different devices communicate. And I guess if you want, like, yeah, that how can I use what can I use for an example? But you have to have two different devices communicating, and it sure seems that way, that that's really the case. That other than this telephone right here, that we know that whenever you pick up a telephone right here, that that you have this like maybe installed into an actual home landline networking. But of course, that whenever you dial out, and I know that a lot of technicians would probably be able to know a lot about that as well. But whenever you dial out, that means it's like the networkings, and then whenever it connects to reaches to another networking line, and let's just say that if you have a friend that does have a different provider, so it sure seems that way that maybe if it's yeah, making a three-way call, especially making a three-way call, and you maybe have a couple friends who have been with AT&T for a long time, maybe a couple of them who have been with yeah, Surgical Verizon or some company like that. So it sure seems that way that whenever you have these different devices, they are connected to maybe the same connection though. But sure, it sure seems that way that you know almost everybody everybody else in the world can maybe one or two is that exactly that you no longer have to worry about putting a quarter into the machine just to make a phone call, at the pay phones. But anybody say yeah, it's I'm like back in those days, I can remember those days that even if you were just trying to make a local call at a payphone, and really, would anybody that may want to word it, would you go back to using those payphones? Do you really miss the old days of using those payphones? Even though if a lot of these phones that may only hold about maybe 4 hours of battery charge, that would you go back to using the old style payphones just because that yeah, maybe if you're in a private location, you want to be in a quiet private location, that could maybe be the reason to why people are saying is to where that there's maybe yeah, I really don't know exactly where, but let's just say that maybe if it is maybe part of St. Louis County or part of Illinois or somewhere where there might be some booths, there might be some phone booths or somewhere like that to where you can be somewhere where it's quiet, and then you'll be able to talk to somebody. And so maybe that might be a reason to why maybe somebody that might still say that they're still going to go ahead and use a phone, but still that but they might say that, well, most places would have it to where that you can it's free guest Wi-Fi. Free guest Wi-Fi, but the way I think about it too, though, that with free guest Wi-Fi, that they don't really provide any source of battery charge. So I guess nowadays it sure seems that way to where that what are a lot of places doing nowadays whenever it comes to charging your battery up, and you wonder that too, to where if you have a laptop, it sure seems besides making sure you have extra batteries though, but then also making sure that you have extra, connector accessories to where that you have them available for your pocket to where if you had to put your phone on charge, just to be able to continue talking enough. So you may think that is to where that you may think that maybe 10 hours of battery charge is enough time to allow you to where you can be able to talk to people, but people may say that yeah, no, it's the battery goes pretty quick, especially if yeah, especially if you've been I'm like how should I say that if you hardly ever turn the battery if you hardly ever turn the phone off, number one, and then also it could also maybe lead to the fact about is to where if you got a lot of apps on the phone that you hardly ever turned off, and so yeah, that we know how that is with social media. You may wonder to where if social media, if it's really draining your battery or not, and so I say that when the ones that are active, but then I put those to sleep or something like that, but still though, but the way I think about it too, though, that if you're getting an incoming call, though, it's possible that that call could be rejected just because if the app is not functioning very well, and we all know too that this world with computers, though, this world with computers, that you would know for sure that if an app is not functioning very well, that's possible that it's been so many hours since it's been used, and people may even think too that yeah, it's like you remember those days where you used to get on the phone with grandma like like I'm just trying to get the phone to work and it's just not working. Well, call me back around 4 o'clock. But the way I think about it, though is that really though, whenever it comes to this digital technology, though, one thing, of course, that I have found out and know about is that whenever it comes to learning about technology though, and you're likely thinking as to where if you're going to be on the phone with somebody and you have to write something down, it's like, it sure seems that way to where that, really though, it's really hard to do a lot of things with just one hand. And like I say, yeah, I'm not even left-handed. I'm right-handed. So like I say that, yeah, and if you're trying to juggle the phone around like that, and maybe if the phone almost slips out of your hand while you're trying to move it, whichever it is, and you likely learn to her. Well, if you're still there, I'll go ahead and try to write down on like here. And like that's not how you're supposed to hold the pen, okay? You're not supposed to hold the pen between your two fingers or whichever you call it. You're not supposed to hold the pin like that. I'm like, well, the way I think about it too, though, that you're not supposed to. That's how you would be holding a toothpick. I'm like, yeah, well, I tell you one thing that I talk about is like so far is the best advice about knowing about between a pin and a microphone, though. In case of anybody wanted to, that yeah, that as of today and knowing about is that with the technology about phones is that no long distance is not too much of a problem as it is nowadays, is it? Compared to back nearly 20 years ago, whenever maybe not everybody even knew, and by say about how to be able to keep a telephone number saved to their phone, and the 102 is that yeah, even if you're going to be having a special event such as a reunion coming up in May, and you one or two is that really though whenever you pick up a telephone, that how come the last thing that you gotta remember is that what is the telephone number or so. But the way I think about it, though is like yeah, and make sure that you got both hands whenever you're handling this. And like I say, like I say, other than playing the tug of war with all these wires, huh? Like cha 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 here and cha cha there. But the way I think about though is like, yeah, that if you got so much going on and you want to is like, how often, this is how you would be holding a toothpick. So really though, that if you had a variety of choices, like say, yeah, and like other than holding a snow shovel just like that or whichever you call it, are you really shuffling any numbers around? Like say, but the way I think about though, but the way I think about though is that really though that if you're working on something and all of a sudden you might get a phone call and being like this, like yeah, that you get a phone call like, what are you doing? I'm trying to figure out the connections. Okay, but the way I think about it too is that really though that yeah, we got up and down arrow right here. And we all wonder too is that, yeah, the up and down arrow right here, if we were to be using this maybe even while we're on the phone right here, and that you may wonder to where that, really though, that, how come those right there are not the volume adjustment options? If you can barely hear the person, how come you can't use these just to be able to adjust the volume? I'm like, how can you adjust the volume on this thing? And people may wonder to where really, how can you adjust the volume on that thing? I can well, um, I think if you can just like be able to hear me, but the way I think about it too though, it's like yeah, to be able to adjust the volume right there, and I'm like yeah, I think there's a switch right here on the side, and if I can remember right, that the phone does take batteries. But so you could might say that, yeah, why would you want to go back to that old landline phone if you have all that you got to worry about? But the way I think about it too, though, that yeah, the job's got to get done, despite about, maybe how complicated it is, huh? But the way I think about it, though is that really though, if you could wear a headset, a headphones, and I say that, yeah, you know, whenever you're going to be holding a headset like that, and 102 is like even talking to the microphone, though, and likely 102 is that does that really look too professional to you? The way I think about yeah, other than what you call the known for radio host, but and people say that yeah, even if you're going to be on your Xbox, even if you're going to be on your Xbox, and say that if you're going to be holding a pen like that, and at 102 is that having a headset like that and allow you to write things down, But then, of course, it's like, what's the number again? But the way I think about it too is that really, though, that I just really think the purpose of it, I'm like, yeah, besides if it's built in or so, and you want to know too, is that really, though, that whenever it comes to thinking about the telephone, no, it's like, yeah, you look at that globe right there and you want to know too, is that, oh, okay, yeah, like almost anywhere in the country, you can go ahead and make a phone call. And despite about you, if you're on a horse or on a ship or anywhere like that, but I'm like one or two that if you're going to be on the boat, then how are you going to be able to keep the phone charged? But still, that anybody say, yeah, solar, solar power, whichever you want to call it, but the way I think about it too, though, that telling everybody here that I want to show everybody here mainly is about Magic Jack, and so it's like, say, yeah, with the Magic Jack device right here, that yeah, it has this two USB options right here, but with Magic Jack right here, that with this device right here, yeah, it's portable enough, but still, that this is landline, and in case of anybody that may want to word it, you might buy this, just because, maybe just to check it out, or maybe if it's on sale, yeah, maybe about 30-30. People would say that if it's on sale, then you'll go ahead and get it, you'll buy it and check it out. But really, though, that the way you think about this right here too is that with Magic Jack, though, that I'm like, yeah, that of course, you had to know what the telephone number is, just to be able to use this. But still, that I'm likely one or two that something like this. How come that you don't have a phone directory? But anyway, but you have right here I talk about like with the telephones. But anyway, thanks for watching, everyone, and like happy I enjoyed phone calling, and if anything, enjoy the conversations, and but if anything, you know, take care, and say you have a great day.